The dark underbelly of American slavery reveals countless stories of exploitation, cruelty, and inhumanity. Among these harrowing tales is the often overlooked sexual exploitation of young black male slaves by white mistresses. These encounters were typically shrouded in secrecy and marked by power imbalances, coercion, and abuse. This article delves into the complex and disturbing dynamics of these relationships, exploring the motivations, methods, and consequences of such exploitation. The institution of slavery in the United States was not just an economic system, but a deeply entrenched social order that permeated every aspect of life, including intimate and sexual relationships. White women, like their male counterparts, were complicit in the system of slavery, benefiting from the labor and subjugation of enslaved Africans. While the sexual exploitation of black women by white men is more widely documented, the abuse of black male slaves by white women also occurred, driven by a mixture of power, desire, and desperation. The relationships between white mistresses and black male slaves were defined by extreme power imbalances. Enslaved individuals were considered property, with no legal rights or personal agency. This dynamic made any semblance of consensual relationships virtually impossible. Young black male slaves, often around the age of 16, were particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Their physical strength made them desirable laborers, and their youth made them easier targets for manipulation and coercion. White mistresses wielded significant power over their household and the enslaved individuals within it. They could dictate the terms of labor, impose punishments, and in many cases, exert sexual control. For the young male slaves, refusal to comply with their mistress's advances could result in severe punishment, including physical violence, increased labor demands, or threats of being sold away from their families. The motivations behind the exploitation of young black male slaves by white mistresses were complex and multifaceted. Some white women, isolated and trapped in loveless marriages, sought comfort and control in their relationships with enslaved men. The rigid social norms of the time limited women's autonomy and sexual expression, leading some to assert their power in these illicit and abusive relationships. Economic and social pressures also played a role. White women were often tasked with managing the household and the enslaved labor force while their husbands were away on business. The combination of loneliness, frustration, and the omnipresent power they held over their slaves created an environment ripe for abuse. The exploitation of young black male slaves often occurred at night, under the cover of darkness. This secrecy was necessary to avoid scandal and repercussions within the white community. The nighttime setting added an additional layer of fear and helplessness for the enslaved men, who were already living in a state of perpetual vulnerability. These nocturnal encounters were characterized by coercion and violence. White mistresses might summon young male slaves to their chambers under various pretenses, from needing assistance with household tasks to outright demands for sexual service. The threat of punishment ensured compliance, and the enslaved men had no recourse to protect themselves from such abuse. The consequences of these exploitative relationships were profound and enduring. Enslaved men who were forced into sexual relationships with their mistresses faced severe psychological and emotional trauma. The lack of control over their bodies and the constant threat of punishment created a pervasive sense of fear and powerlessness. In addition to the immediate physical and emotional harm, these relationships often led to further complications. If the abuse was discovered, enslaved men could be subjected to brutal reprisals from the white male members of the household. The mistresses themselves, seeking to deflect blame and preserve their social standing, might accuse the enslaved men of rape or assault, leading to severe punishments, including whipping, branding, or lynching. The sexual exploitation of black male slaves by white mistresses is a subject shrouded in silence, both historically and in contemporary discussions of slavery. The power dynamics and the taboo nature of these relationships contributed to their underreporting and the erasure of these stories from the broader narrative of American slavery. However, the legacy of this exploitation is evident in the deep psychological scars and the intergenerational trauma experienced by African American communities. Understanding and acknowledging this aspect of slavery is crucial to comprehending the full scope of the dehumanization and brutality that define this period. While documentation of these abusive relationships is sparse, some records and personal accounts provide glimpses into this dark aspect of slavery. Diaries, letters, and legal records occasionally reveal the exploitation of black male slaves by white mistresses. Scholars continue to uncover and interpret these sources, shedding light on the experiences of enslaved men and the pervasive nature of sexual violence within the institution of slavery. In contemporary times, there is a growing recognition of the need to confront and acknowledge all aspects of slavery's brutal history, including the sexual exploitation of enslaved men. This acknowledgement is essential for understanding the full impact of slavery on African American communities and for addressing the lingering effects of this trauma. Educational initiatives, public memorials, and scholarly research are crucial in bringing these hidden stories to light. By confronting the uncomfortable truths of the past, society can move toward a more comprehensive and honest reckoning with history.